Sometimes a traveler's notebook doesn't become what you planned, it becomes what you didn't expect. Because I thought I designed the perfect setup, months of sketches, pockets, embossments, every detail mapped out. Hi, I'm Julie. Welcome to these pages where I follow my life through notebooks, slowly and by hand. Before customizing anything, I already lived with two traveler's notebooks, and they ended up teaching me something I didn't expect. The first is my older, regular size brown cover from the Midori era. It hasn't changed much over the years, just a few small experiments. A pocket I added, then removed. A tiny hole I made in the spine so I wouldn't have to write on top of the knot. That tiny modification made me nervous at first. But afterwards, the notebook felt more like something I could actually use, not some untouchable relic I had to protect. And that feeling stayed with me. This brown cover is softened, marked, lived in, and it simply lets me show up exactly as I am. My passport-size camel is the other one I've carried for years. It travels with me often, and on the front I keep this small Ichigo Ichi charm, a reminder to stay present in the moment I'm actually in, not the one I'm planning. I tend toward the future, so that tiny charm keeps me anchored. Using it over time taught me something simple. A notebook becomes easier to use when it already feels like it belongs to you. And that realization is what pushed me toward a Camel TN in regular size, not to replace anything, but to explore what mine could feel like in the notebook I use the most. But I wasn't sure whether I even liked the idea of a customized notebook. So much of my connection to notebooks comes from the marks and imperfections that appear over time, the small things that make something feel lived in. And importing anything from outside the EU is expensive in Denmark, so I didn't want to rush. I wanted to be as certain as I could before asking someone to create something I hope to carry for years. There have been times where I've stapled together pieces of paper I liked, and even though the result wasn't conventionally beautiful, I used that wonky little notebook far more than the perfect ones. Maybe because I had shaped it, and that freed me to use it for messy notes and the kind of thinking I usually do. I didn't need to be perfect in it since the homemade notebook wasn't either. That's what eventually led me into the Baum-kuchen customization service called Truly Yours. Evenings with screenshots, printouts scattered across the desk, and new sketches appearing in the margins of whatever notebook I was writing in. And everything I mentioned today is linked in the description, so you don't have to keep track while we go. At first, I thought I wanted a notebook with all the features at once. A zip pocket, a utility pocket, extra stitching, an embossment, a brass plate, rivets. Every possibility was appealing when I looked at it in isolation. But I sketched the ideas. Something in me kept hesitating. It was as if the more I added, the less it felt like something I would use. So I kept sketching. I printed layouts, cut out shapes, taped them together, traced pockets and stitching lines, and rearranged the same pieces again and again. It became a way of understanding what I actually wanted from a notebook, not just what was possible to design. Sometimes I thought I'd found the right layout, and then an hour later, I'd be sketching a new version to compare it. It was less about indecision and more about learning what kind of companion I was trying to create. And gradually I began noticing that my favorite ideas weren't the ones with the most features. They were the ones that left room for change. One evening, when I looked at everything together, the early fantasies, the later refinements, the handmade experiments, the pattern became clear. I didn't need a perfectly complete layout. I needed something I could grow into. Something that didn't lock me into choices made before I'd even held the finished cover. And that shift in perspective made the next decisions much easier to see. There was also the practical test that helped clarify things. This is an older leather insert from Baum-kuchen soft goods. It's beautiful, but much stiffer than the leather I usually enjoy. And because I don't use cash anymore, almost everything in Denmark is paid with my phone. I tried using the zip pocket for pens or small scraps of paper, but it bulked up the notebook immediately, and I couldn't write on top of it because the pens underneath made the whole surface uneven. So even though I admired the patina zip pocket, I knew it wasn't right for me. And still, it took me a moment to let the idea go. But looking back now, almost a year later, I'm genuinely glad I tested it first. Otherwise, I would have ended up with a beautiful cover, but I probably wouldn't have used it. And that's when I realized something I've felt many times before. Sometimes the idea of an object is more appealing than living with it every day. After all of those sketches and tests, this is what I finally asked Baum-kuchen to create. A utility pocket on the front. A brass plate with a quote I've loved for years. We travel not to escape life, but for life not to escape us. And I placed the Ichigo Ichi embossment on the back for a simple reason. Traveler's notebooks come with a pre-made hole there, and without anything around it, it always looked a little as if something was missing. But once the embossment was pressed around that hole, it suddenly looked intentional, like it was meant to be part of the design all along. And two secretarial pockets inside. And four brass rivets. Not everything I considered, just the details that felt honest to how I use notebooks and what I wanted this one to become. Seeing all the details together, the pockets, the layout, the colors, it still feels a little unreal that this cover finally arrived. Because for months it looked like this, just a sketch in a journal, a quiet outline of what I hoped it might become. And when the real cover arrived, I hesitated. I'd imagined it for so long that it felt almost too perfect to touch. But perfection isn't what makes a notebook yours. It's the first marks, the softening edges, the signs of real days lived with it. So I started using it every day for work. Nothing dramatic, just steady use. And slowly, it shifted from something I admired to something I reached for without thinking. I even brought it with me on a recent trip to the US, and that's when I realized it had become part of how I move through the world. I also wanted to bring one small piece from my brown TN into the new setup. This little page marker from Baumkuchen with the brass paper airplane and the tiny four-leaf clover. It brings me daily joy, not just to use it, but also that soft little sound it makes whenever the charms touch the table. I chose two inserts to begin with. The first is a dated weekly, not for scheduling, but for noticing what moves slowly across my days. All my actual appointments live in Outlook for work and Google Calendar at home. So this spread is more of a quiet overview than a planner. The second is a blank grid notebook, and that's where most of my thinking happens. Ideas, small reflections, the kinds of notes that don't need polish. Some of us work best with structure, and some with blankness. And at different times, both have helped me find clarity. These are the inserts I've been using until now. I've used this customized TN for almost a year now. I didn't have any dated inserts until now, so this is a first experiment. And these are the ones I'll begin the new experiment with. Together, they give enough shape for awareness without taking away the freedom to wander. When I received the Camel TN and as I slid inserts in for the first time, something became clear to me that I hadn't been able to articulate while sketching layouts. And now it feels like mine, not because it stayed perfect, but because I finally let it live alongside me. I admired neatness, but I need honesty. Otherwise, my notebooks won't be used. And I wanted this notebook to invite me in, not make me hesitate. And this led me to a quiet realization. A notebook doesn't become meaningful because it stays perfect. It becomes meaningful when it starts carrying traces of you. The first mark, the first bend, the first page where something messy finally had a place to land. For me, that's when a notebook becomes a companion. Have you ever held back because a notebook felt too pristine? I know I have. Instead, I've noticed a notebook becomes yours when you stop trying to live up to it and instead let it hold the version of you that actually lives your days. A small shift has begun to take shape here and is already changing how I see the year ahead. You can move into that shift whenever you feel curious to go deeper. Thank you for being here, and come walk with me into the pages still waiting.